Do you know what it means to have a revolution? And what it takes to make a solution?
We do have a little while for a few questions. So can our brother advance at least one question to start with?
Okay, thank you. We've got a lot of questions, so we can't get through them all, but I've put the email of the group on the chat. So if you email us, we'll try to get all the questions answered. So one question that's come through, maybe I can put that to Matthew. Where are we going wrong? Is the problem solely one of leadership, or are we complicit? Should the blame be squarely on us, as in agency in our oppression?
Well, in the United States, where anti-imperialism is going wrong, whether it's in Africa solidarity or Palestine solidarity, and Caribbean solidarity in the United States, as far as I can tell, is in total disarray compared to a couple of decades ago. But where we're going wrong is we let people talk to us in the name of anti-imperialism and human rights, who are clearly funded by the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundations, okay? And they also are openly, directly or one step removed from lobbying the State Department, okay? Or foreign embassies. And so if we think embassies and the State Department, whatever faction we would like, is part of the anti-imperialist movement, then we're not going to be mobilizing insurgent grassroots solidarity, because the power to undermine anti-imperialism is somehow to get the empire to implement the proper policies above society. And so we have people who are various shades of Pan-Afrikanists and nationalists in the United States and socialists who are clearly lobbyists in Washington or wish to advise the State Department in some way. And so when you have forums like that for anti-imperialism and those people predominate, that's where our anti-imperialist education is going wrong. And that's a widespread thing in Atlanta, in DC, in New York, and I've lived elsewhere. So those type of folks need to be challenged, but you can only challenge it from an idea that working people can take their own sanctions or their own direct action against the empire and offer solidarity. And historically they have in the United States and elsewhere, particularly maritime workers, dock workers, people who are transportation workers, people who are in a place to take initiative to undermine the economy, the global economy, in defense of people abroad in some way.
Thank you. Any other panel member wanting to address that question? Let's assume no.
Can I get one question for Andy, if not?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just have to sift through. Grenada has been eyeing offshore oil and gas development for many years without any success so far. Any thoughts on how to prevent such an industry taking place in the first place?
Well, to be honest, I really don't know about the situation in Grenada right now. I mean, I did see Maurice Bishop speak when he came to Westminster Town Hall back in, before he was killed. But I don't know about Grenada today. I mean, the whole idea of an alternative process and an alternative model that Matthew and Ryan have been emphasizing, I completely agree with. I mean, what we have to encourage people to do is try to work out their own processes of social production and to build up grassroots forms of collectivity wherever possible, and not rely on the sort of the great white knight, if you like, which will be the big oil company coming in, because it won't save them. In actual fact, it will corrupt, divide and destroy them. So there is a big ideological challenge, you know, because most neo-colonial governments, one of their key sort of what's the word, their key characteristics is they think development equals attracting foreign direct investment. And what we have to do is to challenge that whole conception of what development is, and to appeal to people's popular traditions and customs, but also to work out a kind of like an alternative plan. What do the people want? What do the working people want for their country? And of course, that's a really challenging process. And generally speaking, and I don't know about Grenada, so I can't comment directly, but generally speaking, political parties have been an obstacle to this process rather than a vehicle for it, because they're always competing for a certain sort of clientelistic type relationship. So it's a very big challenge. I mean, it's a strategic challenge. I mean, how it should be tackled in Grenada is, you know, beyond my, I mean, I encourage such a process.
And I just say very quickly that many of us who have been educated and politically educated in the political movement of the left, you know, you build a party and then you educate and then we will have the revolution. I think it's not going to happen like that anymore. I think we have to think dialectically and we have to think materially in terms of where we are historically and worldwide now. What I see happening is that it is going to be particular issues that are going to mobilize the people. And once those particular issues are what mobilize the people, then we can say, hey, look, you know, we just have to change the whole world in order to solve the problems that you are fighting for. COVID-19, for example, has resulted in the ruling class in the whole world locking down the place and putting people in poverty, etc. So it gives us the opportunity to say, listen, we have to change the whole thing completely. And it validates the argument against capitalism and imperialism, etc. In other words, it's not just some ultra-leftist position that you're taking. The same thing with police violence. We see that in France, we see that in the United States, we have it in Jamaica, in Africa, elsewhere. And I believe that if we put our energies into those kinds of struggles, put our energies into those kind of struggles dealing with the environment as well, then it gives us the opportunity to legitimately begin to revert to our old style upbringing, where we can really begin to now talk about capitalism and imperialism and class struggle and a worldwide socialist system and a classless society, etc. So I think we must not lose sight of these struggles that we see breaking out around the world, and we must put all our energies into them, support them, and see where we go from there.
Any other panelists wishing to comment? And my understanding of it is that we're running out of time. Amanda, have you got any guidance on that?
It really depends. I think without testing the patience of the audience, if there's any comments amongst you or any last questions, I think we could go for another 10 minutes, maybe end at 9:40.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Melinda has had to drop out, but if there are any questions for her, please do email them to us. Joe has put the group email in the chat, and we will direct your questions to whatever speaker you want to connect with.
Okay. Let's keep it going by another question, unless the panelist wishes to comment.
Yeah, or ask each other a question themselves.
I was going to add a couple of thoughts on the last question, which is to say that I think it's important. I don't have a definitive answer on the Grenada question. What I will say is that we shouldn't be surprised that everyday working people are quite enchanted by the possibility of sort of petrocapitalist development, as in the case of Guyana. And precisely this is because of the failure to produce compelling alternatives to create sort of economic circumstances that protects the livelihoods of working people in the region. So again, if we think about the fact that, as Melinda pointed out earlier, North Atlantic social democracies, the Scandinavian model is itself built on the same extractive model, it shouldn't surprise us that this is quite alluring to people. So what we really need to be more concerted about is not waiting for the moment in which there is a sort of large offshore discovery in Grenada and then protesting and saying that we, in the name of the global climate movement, we want to leave the oil in the ground. Where does that leave the working people of Grenada? So you have to begin building that prefigurative politics. And again, this is where I talk about certain ideas like social ecology and thinking about food sovereignty, in sort of fighting international debt, not simply for the benefit of a sort of comprador class or political class within the region, but for the benefit of the people themselves. So I think that we have to think about waging this on a number of fronts. This is what I was talking about in terms of linking together, again, the international insurgency against the police state with the global climate movement and with movements for sort of workers' democracy and economic democracy, in which people are actually enabled to support and provide for themselves and their families. You have to begin there, otherwise we're making a profound error.
By the way, let me just say, one other thing. With the election of Joe Biden, I think some new dynamics, political dynamics, have developed in the United States as well. And, because Trump everybody has been dumping on Trump. But the point is that what's the difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden? And I think that in the Black movement itself, those of us who have been comfortable with voting for Biden are now going to really see that Biden is just as racist as Donald Trump is, and having elected a Black woman or appointed a Black woman as his vice president means absolutely nothing. And so therefore, the Black movement is going to have to do some critical introspection in terms of moving forward to dealing with what now confronts them under Joe Biden.
Any other comment? I have a question. Actually, I'm not quite sure I agree with Lloyd on that one. I think it's important to recognize fascism, and even if you don't, and I don't, have any expectation whatever of Biden, it does seem to me to be important that the American electorate has rejected the overtly fascist tendencies of the Trump and his clique. I mean, I think it's actually important, but no, that's for another time. But I think it's worth registering. The other point I would like to ask Andy and also Melinda. I don't see the the forces that alternative to capitalism that are going to solve the environmentalist crisis. And so while clearly one has to remain anti-capitalist, if the forces that are producing the problem don't change, the problem will intensify. And so it is important that capitalism recognizes the challenge of global warming and does something about it, because the forces that are in opposition to it are marginal or impotent fundamentally. So I'm not hopeful that there's going to be a change, but if a transformation is to happen between the economy and the economy, and an economy that doesn't churn out greenhouse gases and one that does, then capital itself has to change.
Yes and no, isn't it? Right. I mean, capital scours the earth. I mean, what Ryan was saying is true. There's this whole infrastructure, you know, they got boats, they got surveys, they've got a huge global apparatus which scans the globe looking for potential sources of profit, you know, under the ocean. They're talking about major projects of deep sea mining now. Okay, so as long as capitalism can find a profit, it will keep on going, extracting natural wealth. And it is important to read Marx on this, because he's talking about surplus profits. These are not just ordinary profits, these are massive profits.
No.
So the rent from wealth extraction bolsters whoever's got a monopoly over that type of extraction. That's the secret of the big oil corporations, and indeed in many ways imperial power. So while imperialism is able to dominate how humanity relates to nature, it must be more and more destructive. And to be honest, Paris Agreement was already like a slightly social democratic dirty deal. And it is actually the very, what's the word? It's a minimum for the global capitalist system, which they won't meet. I mean, they'll come up with some partial solution, which means the planet will probably warm by 2 or 3 degrees by the middle of the century. And it will be catastrophic for hundreds of millions of people, billions of people. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, within capitalism, its solution will mean more and more environmental and human destruction. So maybe things do have to get a lot worse before they can get better. I mean, sorry, but I mean, international social fascism might rule before there's enough of a counter movement, because there are counter movements, but you're fairly brutally honest about this. I mean, they're quite localized, small. I mean, I do know Colombia quite well. For 60 years they've been fighting this type of extractivism, right? And every year the state kills 500 activists, right? That's the human toll of communities trying to resist global capitalism. And it's like an unknown thing. So the catastrophic consequences will continue. And how long and where and when there'll be a sufficient sort of critical mass for another revolutionary response, it will come. We don't know where, we don't know when, but it will come.
Can I just make one quick point? And that is, a lot of times in the name of political method and the observation of the relative consciousness of human beings, we say that we have to rely on some aspect of the capitalist state to fix things, because human consciousness doesn't seem to grasp what's needed. And so what happens is that we say there's no potential for insurgency, as many people did before last March. Then we've had 5 straight months of insurgency in multiple cities in the United States, for example, simultaneously, not one at a time. And then the same people who were saying that before come back to, now we have to make the proper policies with the elites, blah, 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 blah. So I'm not suggesting that there is a race or social class that's magical. There's not a magical race or social class with a special consciousness, but somehow in observing human development, we find our way back to looking for a faction within the state to measure reason or to embody reason. And what I would just add in relation to what Lloyd was suggesting in relation to the recent election is that what Biden and the Obama-based Democratic Party represent is the weaponizing of thin conceptions of Black social identity and thin conceptions of women's social identity against ordinary people. And this weaponization justifies the administration of police murder and mass incarceration where people of color and women administrated. And the people in the forefront of the struggle in the US, there's a handful of people, I'm not gonna name any names, they're the ones pointing in the direction and pushing on those fraudulent ideas. But the Democrats constantly weaponize that, and we need to be alert to it.
Thank you.
Just a
Yes, Lloyd.
Yeah, just a quick point. Yeah, just a quick point on the American situation. Because as Matthew was saying, for the past 4 or 5 months, we've been witnessing protest after protest after protest. You know, people are going out there and hammering away at police violence. And that is something that really affects the Black population in the United States, as it does affect us here in Jamaica. But we haven't really borrowed from what we see going on in the United States. But I believe from where we sit and what we see, you are more, you have all the ingredients now to step up the struggle, to step up the rhetoric, to step up the organization, to speak in bold terms and revolutionary terms, etc. Because even though Trump got a significant amount of votes as well, the fact is that the momentum is on those who voted against him. And people should realize that, hey, we can't stop and we can't just depend on Biden to solve our problems for us, because he has already shown his political hand. Is he going to deal with Israel the way he should? You know, all these issues that Venezuela and so on, he's already called Maduro a thug. And is he going to deal with Cuba the way he should, etc.? There's US telling Jamaica what you can do and what you can't do where data protection is concerned, etc. So I think it's very opportune moment at this time to step up the struggle, to step up the rhetoric and organizing, and we all need to work together.
A small point. Clearly, nobody with any even class analysis begins to expect anything from Biden or begins to believe that American power is going to be transformed by the fact that Biden, rather than whatever, is in power. But you can't possibly talk about the struggles in the streets of the United States that have just happened and all of the work that went into voting out Trump without recognizing that it matters. And if you say that it matters and that those struggles must be intensified, it has to be the case that something important happened when Trump was voted out.
I have a feeling, Brother Chair, that maybe we have a final remarks. And my final remark is,
I'm with you. Yeah.
Is I would really like to thank Amanda and Joe, who actually did the work to make our platform possible and our voices heard. So I really strongly like to thank both of them, and to all my fellow panelists as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me just echo the thanks for all the presenters, Amanda and our comrade, for the hard work that went into it, as Andy said. There is more work to be done, and there will be other fora in the future.